My family's from Himachal. I hadn't really spent any time there. So after I graduated, I made a deliberate decision to move to Himachal and set up a practice there. I have a design and make studio through which I'll be exploring some of the issues that I'll share with you today. Himachal, like Kashmir, has a peculiar situation. It's a small state. It's mostly rural. It's surrounded by a lot of industrialized and significantly affluent states. And a lot has been done about protecting the land in terms of legislation, in terms of policy, but not enough around the identity of Himachal. So my presentation today will focus on how we can shape identity, and particularly distinct identities, through the way we choose to build. I moved to a small village outside of Dharamshala. This is on the foothills of the Dhauladars, and started to sort of put in place some of the ideas that I'd had about developing a distinct Himalayan character. This is a village that's mostly inhabited by Gadi shepherds. So they're nomadic shepherds. This is where their families are based, a very agrarian lifestyle. And I decided to make my home here within a community of mud homes set up by a lady called Didi Contractor. The Kangra Valley is a very fertile, clay-rich region, and so a lot of the local housing there is done using sun-dried mud bricks or adobe. The idea here was to sort of work with a skill that the local craftsmen were familiar with, but at the same time enhance some of their understanding of the material through scientific sort of research. So very often, building in remote areas, it tends to be much more convenient to bring in a large team. And the deliberate attempt here was to not negate the local community, but to sort of find opportunities for the local community to become part of our growing process. So as you can see, and a lot of it was just around upgrading their skills. The finishes needed to be improved, but it was very much in character with the homes that were already existing around there. In terms of our choice of materials, again, we were mostly looking at natural materials, so a lot of mud, timber, which is available in the area, a lot of slate. The idea is that coming to small remote areas, I find that it's very important to be very careful about the choices we make in terms of how you source your material and what is the kind of material. So over here, as opposed to bringing in industrial materials, we were looking at typologies that were native to that place. We were also sort of looking at sourcing materials through non-conventional means, because a lot of these communities have rights to forests. They have the skills to be able to develop it. We also looked at gathering materials. A lot of the stonework that you see, there are slate mines around there. Rather than mining, what we decided to do was to pick up a lot of the stone that ran down from the stream. So a lot of the stones you see have all been collected. There were village boys who have mules who would collect the material. And then we developed several techniques through which that material, which is available in a very limited local radius, can become part of our building vocabulary. These are just some shots of the home. And we found eventually that building in this manner became slightly popular, and we were approached by an American couple that was settled there to try and develop a new typology. And this was for a shrine. This was a Buddhist shrine that they wanted to build in their garden. And the idea was, again, to look at the ways traditional temple or shrine typologies there, which had as much unbuilt as built. We worked with local carpenters from the area. We tried, and the shrine essentially is a pavilion structure. It's set in a garden, and the idea was to keep the landscape as the important element there. Again, using a lot of slate. The thicker granite that you can see there is stone that we excavated in the course of foundations that was again incorporated into the site. A lot of the woodwork here now, which was given Tibetan or a Buddhist-inspired aesthetic, small shrine room inside, but largely it's a Havan Kund and a garden that surrounds it that makes the place. There's a fire altar, and in the next slide you can sort of see the setting, but it remains as part of the landscape. I mean, it remains as something that's integral to the landscape. This was Himachal has also sort of taken in several refugees from the Tibetan community, and one of the problems that we found in the villages around there was tensions that would often come up between local communities and the Tibetans that had been moved there. In the absence of any common language or cultural or religious commonality, very often there would be conflicts, and this was a pilot project that we were asked to lead, where the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama asked us to design an old age home and to try and find ways to engage the local community. And so as part of the project, we included the entire construction of the project was sourced to a group of local craftsmen. We were supplying the expertise, and the idea was to build an internship program for unemployed youth of the village, to have them be a part of the building of the Tibetan community. And the area here, this is now in Mandi. So it's in a bowl, it's in a valley, and there's several mines around there, and very limited funding. So the strategies that we developed here was to kind of look at quarry waste, so it's much smaller stones, and developed a manner of sort of masonry where we incorporated a lot of the stone waste, but also sort of did a hybrid structure. It's meant to be an old age home. It's in a very seismic prone area, so it has concealed, in terms of its technology, we're not trying to pretend we are existing in the previous century. We're very much aware of the dangers that building on such a site, and it's on a riverbed site. So concealed within this is an entire sort of RCC framework that holds the structure together, but also looking at energy. So we were looking at hollow bricks, a lighter sort of roof structure, which is in timber and again able to withstand small seismic shocks that happen there occasionally. And that's the finished product, along with the team of about 8 masons and carpenters. And here again, the idea was not to super specialize. In most villages till today, villages are able to sort of deal with small-scale carpentry, small-scale masonry on their own. And so the idea was to train each one of these boys to be able to handle the materials, whether it was carpentry, whether it was masonry or plumbing. It was a sort of well-rounded sort of internship that they got. And each one of them has now sort of gone on to set up their own practices. Another sort of interesting dilemma is very often in mountain regions, we are building in very remote areas, inaccessible areas. This was a project where we were asked to build a retreat house, which was several sort of minutes, 40 minutes or so away from the closest road. So there was no vehicle access, there was no electricity, there was no water supply. And the challenge was to find a way to build there without undermining the reason why this particular site had been chosen. So again, we sort of looked at how we could gather. We had small teams of women from local villages who would gather stone from the forest and stockpile that. We had traditional masons, because the communities here have worked traditionally with the slate mines, which have since been shut. So there was a lot of unemployment there, and we decided to use their skills as part of the project. You can sort of see the earthquake band coming in, so it's again an integrated hybrid sort of structure. Again, some of the local villagers who were employed as part of the process. And that gives you some sense of logistics. Almost everything had to, I mean, in terms of planning, it had to be planned to the point of, to what point do we prefabricate, to what point do we sort of bring it up and assemble. But we managed to do it all almost entirely by hand. So it's sort of a lower stone structure that's similar to the village houses. The upper story is in mud, which compensates for the fact that it's extremely prone to a lot of wind and cold, but the house itself sort of manages to insulate itself quite well. And that's Dr. Barbara, who commissioned the house. And yeah, and that's just how it, very small footprint, and how it settles into the hillside. And then, interestingly, we were approached by someone from Kumaon. They were keen to build, and this is a hospitality project. They were keen to build something, a homestay in the hills in Kumaon, close to a place called Jageshwar. And in Jageshwar, we found there's a particular technique of Sukhi Chinai, which is dry stone, very skilled dry stone masonry. And we decided to, but of course it had its own problems in terms of keeping it insect proof and sort of wind blowing through, so we sort of developed it. But what's interesting about the technique is, again, it's a zero waste site, because effectively almost all the waste rubble you generate is used within the walls. We did a lot of salvage, and we found a lot of old jalis, jarokhas that we also incorporated within. But the idea was that having built it, one, of course, it was very small scale. We wanted it to remain as something that you could mistake for a village home, not something that looked institutional. And then we've gone back to build several extensions to that. The interiors are kept very modest, and that's the sort of experience that a lot of the traveler there is looking for. So this was, and I think this is significant simply because we did the tour yesterday, and it's amazing the sort of handworking skills that are still available in Srinagar. This is a project again for the Tibetan community. As you know, the Tibetan community is in exile, and there was an increasing sort of concern that next generation Tibetans that have no direct contact with Tibet were losing touch with some of the material culture associated with their past. So the idea was to build an institute that brought together the Kasang Yeshi, who is the former Prime Minister of the cabinet in exile, located 5 master craftsmen who had been trained in Tibet. And the idea was to build a series of workshops around each master craftsman, and to set up a training program so that unemployed youths that are sort of crossing the border get a chance to train in India now in techniques that are no longer accessible to them in Tibet. It's set around a very lush landscape. Again, the idea being it needed to feel like a Buddhist landscape. So we looked at Japanese gardens, but so this is one of the workshops where in Thangka painting, which is a traditional sort of religious, and this is in embroidery and applique, again as part of the ritual culture. There's metal craft and statue making, which became part of the temple, and it's sort of used as artifacts all in the interior. And then also sort of painting on wood. And the idea was to find a contemporary use for much of these crafts, because it wasn't to preserve them as dead crafts, but to sort of contemporize them, make them sort of market savvy. Wood carving as well. And so on the one hand, there's the training program which allows young Tibetans to train there, but at the same time it offers one place for a visitor to come and experience the richness of Tibetan culture, and guests also get a chance to try their hand at some of these crafts. That's the landscape we developed for them, which is understated, but yes, sort of picks up on Zen Buddhist ideas. And finally, this is interesting because this is an event that we were asked to organize for the Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Kalachakra Puja is a tantric initiation that he gives almost every year. He does it in Ladakh very often. But in 2006, which was a significant year in the Buddhist calendar, we were asked to organize the Kalachakra Puja in Amravati, in Andhra Pradesh, which is believed to be the original site where the teaching was first given. And interestingly, because it was politically volatile situation for the Tibetan government to approach the government of Andhra Pradesh, which had a lot of funding coming from China, it was decided that the project would be led by an architect, which is very surprising, but also that the project would try and find ways to contribute to the tourism in Andhra Pradesh by highlighting some of the significant Buddhist religious sites there. We were also asked to set up a township. Amravati is a very small village, about 10,000 people. And we were expecting about 200,000 people coming in for the event. So we were leasing agricultural fields. We had to build sensibly in a way that we could build the township and dismantle within within just 2 months. But also we had to find a way in which our presence was contributing to the local development. So we'll start with. So we built a small sort of temple there, again using some of the tailoring skills. It's a temporary, as you can see, a lot of it is just temporary through fabric and embroidery and painting. But also, interestingly, given the opportunity to bring in 2,000 people, we were able to pull quite a bit of investment from the government, and we decided to locate these very in and around schools and hospitals, so that upgrading the sanitation, upgrading the infrastructure in terms of access to water, in terms of roads that needed to be built in the village, so that when we left, we sort of left Amravati in a slightly better shape than we found it. Another part of the program which was interesting was the stupa at Amravati. The stupa at Amravati had been almost entirely dismantled. Much of it is in the British Museum in London, and a few pieces were still available in Chennai. And we were able to engage with the ASI and convince them to let us use the site for a religious purpose. We managed to get some of the artifacts back from the museum in Chennai and just invigorate the stupa as a living monument, as as you know, Amravati, 12 years down the line, Amravati is now sort of become state capital. And I think that's just some of the trajectory that we've had. Thank you.